So millions of dollars in both litigation fees and damages aside, what are the stakes of your case versus Dr. Michael E. Mann?
Well, I think it's one of the most consequential free speech case in the last half century. If in the event that I were to lose, I'd appeal it to the Supreme Court, because I think that's the stakes. We would essentially be in a world where juries, courts, but not just judges, but juries would be litigating science. No court anywhere in the common law world has been asked to rule upon the validity of a scientific hypothesis. And for American courts to start doing that would be a disaster for the field of science. But beyond that, it's a matter of public policy. Climate change matters not so much because of what some guy with ice cores is doing in Finland. It matters because the government is presuming to tax us and regulate us and make changes to the economy. And that makes it a matter of public policy. And if matters of public policy can be dragged into courtrooms and decided by juries, then there is no First Amendment. It's not much of a First Amendment as it is if you can be put through a court process lasting half a decade and spend a seven-figure sum to discover that you're legally entitled to make a 120-word blog post. I mean, that's two very faint cheers for the First Amendment. But if, in effect, we were to enter a world where public policy can be litigated in courtrooms, then there is no First Amendment at all.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you escaped Canada to try to avoid that sort of system, but it isn't working out too well, I guess.
No, I underwent a similar process in Canada. My writing was attacked as being flagrantly Islamophobic, and 3 human rights complaints on the grounds of hate speech were made. And they're serious things. Had I lost the case in British Columbia, it would have been a de facto lifetime publication ban in my own country. And I always thought, when I'd attend court in Vancouver, I remember at the end of that week-long trial, flying back to Montreal, long-haul flight, and got into Montreal, got into my car and crossed at the tiny little border crossing of Derby Line, Vermont, to re-enter the land of the First Amendment, the land of the free. And the guy said, "What was your business in Canada?" I said, "I was on trial at the Robson Street Courthouse in Vancouver for crimes against humanity." And he goes, "Oh, well, welcome back to America, sir." And I did feel, wow, I'm just breathing the freedom and the First Amendment and the absolute. This is the difference between the rest of the English-speaking world and the United States, is there's a constitutional absolute right to free expression. But that's of limited value if you, in a litigious society where people can tie you up in court for 5 to 10 years. And it's of even less value if you actually lose the spirit of vigorous public discourse. And that's my concern too, that on climate change and many other issues, there's no point in having absolute freedom of speech if, as a practical matter, public discourse shrivels to an ever narrower range of opinion as it has on climate and other subjects.
Which is, of course, antithetical to scientific inquiry
Right.
in the first place.
Yeah.
And you've written that in your case, the process really is the punishment. There's a chilling of anyone who challenges conventional wisdom
Right.
on this. Why is it that the orthodoxy in the scientific community has to either basically attack or even go into court and litigate against someone like you who challenges their position?
Well, I think at a certain level, we have a much more homogeneous science world than we did in the 19th century. So, I mean, people talk about people talk about this relationship between science and government as if it's an entirely natural thing, but it wasn't 200 years ago. And the 19th century, lest we forget, was the age of invention. It was the century that set us up for the 20th century, and in a strange way, we're kind of running on the fumes of the 19th century's great age of invention. What was shocking to me, which I didn't really understand until I got immersed in this case, was what I call the climate of fear in climate science, where, with the exception of people who are at the very end of their careers, they're the professor emeritus guys, they're the genuine Nobel laureates, they're people who are sufficiently distinguished and sufficiently venerable that they can afford to speak up against this. But for people, young people and middle-aged people, the pressure to conform in climate science is very real, and the hostility to those who step out of line is absolutely extraordinary. The viciousness and the hostility that's shown toward them is like nothing. I mean, I've spent all my life around the theatre, for example. Now, showbiz people are as bitchy and catty and clawing each other and getting at each other, and they're competitive, and you know, you've got all these showbiz saying it's not important that I succeed, only that my best friends fail, and all that. That's the world I knew, and it's nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the way it is in climate science. And that's been incredibly damaging for the integrity, not just of climate science, but of science as a whole.
Your testimony in front of the Senate, I believe last year, you drew a very interesting parallel, and you sort of turned the logic of Senator Sheldon Whitehouse on its head. And Senator Whitehouse is threatening to use RICO laws against the oil companies who fund research that climate scientists like Dr. Michael Mann don't like. And what you argued was actually it's the scientific community that resembles a racket, not those who are debating against them. Explain that.
Yeah, we had an example of that at, I think it was George Mason University, where a group of climate scientists actually wrote to the Attorney General to demand that he bring these prosecutions against dissidents, as they saw it. These are scientists who signed this letter. It's quite outrageous. And in fact, it subsequently emerged a couple of weeks later that the head guy had a sideline going in a so-called non-profit foundation that had received gazillions of dollars in funding from various US agencies, in return for which he made his wife a vice president of the scientific foundation and his daughter as its chief operating officer and all the rest of it. And in fact, they operate in the same way as the stevedores union does in the classic Elia Kazan film On the Waterfront, in which they ruthlessly enforce this omerta, this code of silence, where everybody is D&D, deaf and dumb, as they say down on the waterfront. And they're essentially big climate godfathers who don't want anybody to step out of line. And when you have people like Lennart Bengtsson, is a very distinguished Swedish climatologist, and he made the mistake of accepting an invitation from Nigel Lawson's Global Warming Foundation in London. Nigel Lawson was Chancellor of the Exchequer, the finance minister in Mrs. Thatcher's ministry. He's not a crazy guy. He's a minister of the Crown. Everybody on his board is members of the House of Lords and former ministers of this and secretaries of that. There's a former private secretary to the Queen. They're all eminently respectable, eminently respectable. But it was not possible for the big climate enforcers to allow a Swedish climatologist to get mixed up with SEAM, because their worry is that you let him do it, others are going to do it. And then the dam cracks, and the uniformity, the rock-solid, ruthlessly enforced compliance will crumble away. And I have a very profound respect after these last few years for people like Judith Curry, who was the head of Earth Sciences down at Georgia Tech. And she is one of the most eminent female scientists in her field. And she actually changed her mind. And she became disgusted after the revelation of the ClimateGate emails at the way the global warming debate, at the way these guys had a hammerlock on peer review. Phil Jones at East Anglia peer-reviewed Michael Mann at Penn State, and Michael Mann peer-reviewed Phil Jones. The racket is like almost pitiful. Michael Mann gets Phil Jones some fellowship with some American scientific body as a little back scratch, and then asks Phil if he can get Mike something at the Royal Society, whatever. I mean, it's like this is what they've reduced to. She became disgusted, Judith Curry, at this, and changed her mind. The vitriol with which she's attacked, the misogyny of this little climate cabal is quite extraordinary. Michael Mann, the guy who created the global warming hockey stick, he linked to this post arguing in all seriousness that Judith Curry was sleeping with me. This is the way one respected scientist deals with another respected scientist. So if you're a female scientist and you disagree, they call you a whore. You're a whore for big oil. They use all these porno terms for the female scientists. If you're upwards of 67, 68, they say, oh, clearly he's senile. He was okay back in the 60s and 70s, but he's lost it now. He's senile. And if you're young, they absolutely will destroy you and crowbar you. And I have strange respect. I have a respect for people who don't particularly care for me, don't like me, don't want to be associated with me. But for people who do no more than talk to both sides, like a Welsh scientist, Tamsin Edwards, for example, she got brutally slapped down by Michael Mann just because she doesn't write off anyone who isn't in 100% agreement. Something is sick, actually. And I'll make another point. I sort of made a jocular reference to it earlier. That when people say, if you're not a scientist, they say, well, you can't comment about that. If you're a physicist, they say, well, that's not climate science, so you can't comment about that. Climate science is an interdisciplinary field. It involves all kinds of things. It used to be a branch of physical geography. Now it's really a type of computer modeling. But you've got all kinds of people putting input into that. You've got at one end, you've got the dendrochronologists who are out there taking the tree rings. And at the other end, you've got statisticians who are the guys who know about how you weight the tree rings against the ice cores and against the temperature record and all of that. And the minute these nutty activists say, oh, well, he's just a statistician, that's something to do with climate science. This idea that climate science, every scientific field is interconnected. The idea that climate science uniquely is hermetically sealed off from every other scientific discipline is completely deranged. And yet that's the case they make.
And the climate scientists are, of course, the ones who are fudging the data very transparently, as you've laid out. You've likened the environmentalist crowd, the pro-climate disruption crowd. I like to call it climate disruption because it was global warming, global cooling, climate change, now disruption. You've likened them to basically being akin to Islamic supremacists, that they want to impose their vision on the world.
Yeah.
What is the end game for the climate alarmist crowd?
Well, I think I think at the extreme end, there is an actual hatred of humanity. And those are the people who say, well, there's 7 billion people on the planet and our maximum carrying capacity should only be 2 billion. So therefore we have to figure out a way how to persuade the other 5 billion to go out of business. And at a slightly less insane level, but related to that, are those who are anti the developed world, in the sense that if you're picking which 2 billion people are allowed to survive, they point out that someone who's born in Somalia has a carbon footprint that's only a 20th the size of someone who's born in Sweden or someone who's born in Canada. So therefore, it's the Western world that needs to put itself out of business. Roger Kimball quoted someone at the start of business here today who said that they were actually in the de-development of that's the word they use.
But it's progressive.
Well, it's by which they mean by progressive is returning us to some Edenic state. Now, I don't particularly. If you were to wind back the clock to before the Industrial Revolution, there's lots of bits of that world that I would quite like, and I myself would be interested in living in that world. But the idea that a bunch of people who've done 6-year bachelor's degrees in environmentalism studies courses could survive, even if you had like an EMP attack and all the computers were wiped out and the planes dropped from the skies and the cars ceased to function, and we went back 150, we went back to, say, Jacksonian America. The difference in Jacksonian America is that every able-bodied guy knows how to build a log cabin. They know how to chop down a tree. They know how to frame a house. They know how to put a door in the house. They know what the pitch of the roof should be, and they know how to shingle a roof. And the idea that the beneficiaries of the most pampered, extended adolescence in the history of mankind would suddenly be at ease in that world is absolutely ridiculous. And I sometimes, in my more lurid fantasies, when everyone thinks it'll be great, everyone thinks it'll be like whatever that Raquel Welch film from the 60s is, where she's running around in a fur-trimmed bikini. Well, you couldn't have the fur-trimmed bikini now because it's bad to wear animal pelts. So Raquel Welch would be running around nude. The film would be even better. But the idea that these people, that this generation would be able to live for a minute in that world. Essentially, we have two competing views of primitivism fighting for supremacy in our world. Both of them hate the Western developed world. The environmental crowd think it's a great evil. So do the Sharia crowd. And once every so often, these conflicting models of primitivism interact. Earth Hour. You know Earth Hour, this ridiculous thing every year where they turn off the lights for an hour on a Saturday evening and you pretend you're doing something to save the planet by sitting in the dark for an hour. In Sweden, a Swedish town a couple of weeks ago, they had to cancel Earth Hour because they've taken in so many so-called refugees that it's unsafe to switch the lights off for an hour because the hot Scandinavian blondes are going to be feeling a lot of unwanted attention as they're wandering around an entirely darkened Swedish town for 60 minutes. And that's fascinating to me. That's the two different models of primitivism, two groups that most hate the modern Western world and want to destroy it and have competing models of primitivism. And the soft, delusional, utopian primitivism of Western environmentalists, when it came up against the hard, serious face of hardcore Islamic primitivism, Earth Hour in Sweden, the hardcore guys, their primitivism model won out because they mean it, and these soft, sappy, deluded, middle-aged Western students don't.
So in other words, Islamic supremacists will save us from the environmentalist crowd.
I hope it doesn't come to that. If it were to be that, I'd be looking for a neither of the above box somewhere on the form.
I'll ask two more brief questions. You've been very generous with your time. One is, in your concluding testimony in front of that Senate subcommittee, you spoke about a play, The Great Immensity, and you compared it to Zabiba and the King, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and you drew a parallel between them. I was wondering if you could explain that parallel and also just comment that I actually saw The Great Immensity accidentally. And as you'll explain, it was funded with something on the magnitude of $700,000 in taxpayer funds. And I literally thought that it was a parody of the climate alarmist crowd because it was so bad and so insane. Explain it.
Yes, it was essentially a... everyone thinks that putting money into trying to save the planet, ameliorating trying to reverse climate change by reversing the global thermostat is insane. It's like throwing money down a hole. And yet fortune is spent on it. And I had no idea just how absurd the amounts of money being spent on it were until I discovered that the United States government, which means me and you, had paid to create a climate change musical. The one thing we know for certain is that if you just want to lose money, you should sink it into a Broadway musical. So if you don't like the if you don't like the $19 trillion of public debt right now, if you want to lose even more money, they should sink the next $10 trillion into developing new musicals. That'd be as complete a waste of money as anybody can ever do. So they came up with this government musical. And nobody finds it odd that it's essentially a propaganda exercise. We look at Soviet propaganda posters and Soviet propaganda from the 1930s, and we laugh at it. We laugh at those boobs for putting up with it. After the communists took over Eastern Europe, in Hungary they loved Hungarian operetta. They loved Franz Lehár and Kalman. They loved The Merry Widow and The Count of Luxembourg. But these were all ideologically unsound because they involved a countess who falls in love with a serving boy, or a prince who is the romances of a prince. So you couldn't have all these singing counts and countesses and princes and what have you in operetta, but people still loved operetta. So the communists created an operetta called The State Department Store, which is not what a Broadway producer would regard as a hit title. The State Department Store, played throughout Eastern Europe. And we laugh at that because we think it's the idea of an ideologically conformist operetta is patently absurd. 70 years later, American taxpayers sink their money into an ideologically conforming musical about climate change. And I compared it with Zabiba and the King, which was Saddam Hussein wrote a romantic novel. The old joke was that he didn't actually type it himself, he dictated it because he was a great dictator. That was the joke. And so Saddam Hussein wrote this novel, Zabiba and the King, which is about a beautiful woman called Zabiba and this cruel but just king. And obviously, you know, the undulating curves of Zabiba's lush, ripe body represent Iraq, and the king represents Saddam Hussein. And they turned this into a musical, which played in Baghdad. Never played Broadway, never played the West End, but it was like the Cats of Baghdad. And amazingly enough, when Saddam Hussein writes a musical, it gets great reviews. It was 2 thumbs up from all the Baghdad critics. And again, we laugh at that, and we're doing the same thing. We're doing the same thing. And I resist state ideology. I don't like it. I don't care whether it's communism, I don't care whether it's fascism, and I don't care whether it's the fluffiest stuff like environmentalism. If you've got a state-ism, you're in big trouble. There should not be a state ideology backed by taxpayer dollars. It's a repulsive notion, and the failure of that show. Every American, if we still had, like, I think Joan Baez or somebody, were conscientious objectors during the Vietnam War, and they used to deduct from their taxes what they thought was going to support the American war machine. I wish we didn't have such a powerful IRS, because I'd like conscientious objectors to withdraw the, whatever it was, $1.87 that each of us had to pay to stick government money in the climate change musical.
If you were to have a megaphone and you could speak to the American public broadly, what would be your message on climate change in general and carbon dioxide in particular?
Well, my message is a simple one, that we are enjoying the blessings of good times. The Little Ice Age, which is the period that preceded ours and ended at the beginning of the 19th century, was a grim time. Life was poorer, life was meaner. The development of the United States and the development of Canada were greatly advanced by our emergence from the Little Ice Age. It has been a period of unparalleled prosperity and opportunity for people around the world, more and more people around the world. If you look at people in India now, in the Indian middle classes now enjoy the lifestyle, the economic status of Southern Europe in the 1950s and 60s. In other words, the benefits of better health, better economic opportunity are being extended in this period to more and more people around the planet. People live in freedom. They have the right to vote for their own governments. Responsible government in the British Empire began in Nova Scotia in 1848. It would not have been possible in 1748. It was simply too cold. There would have been too few people. You would not have been able to organize society on that basis. This idea that the temperature since the mid-19th century is somehow bad for the world is actually insane. It has been the age of mass liberty, and that would not have been possible in large parts. It's certainly not possible in Scandinavia, in Northern Europe, in Canada and other places without that. So we actually should celebrate the emergence from the Little Ice Age. And the idea that we demonize it is a kind of madness. And it's a madness that has been embraced by the people who've benefited from it most. You know, people who get $20 million to star in some crappy motion picture that takes up a few days of their time, and they somehow don't understand that they're at the very apex of a system that has enabled that, and of a world that has come into being since the emergence from the Little Ice Age. It's bizarre, and we should laugh at these people, and we should celebrate warmth and fear a return to the Little Ice Age.